So in this video, we'll be talking about the expenditure cycle, specifically the purchases and cash disbursements procedure. So our objectives are as follows. First is recognize the fundamental tasks that constitute the purchases and cash disbursement processes. Second, be able to identify the functional areas involved in purchases and cash disbursement activities and trace the flow of these transactions through the organization. Third is be able to specify the documents, journals, and accounts that provide audit trails, promote the maintenance of historical records, and support internal decision-making and financial reporting. Fourth is to understand the exposures or risks associated with purchases and cash disbursement activities and recognize the controls that reduce this risk. Lastly is be aware of the operational features and the control implications of technology used in purchases and cash disbursement system. So we have here the procurement cycle or the expenditure cycle, specifically the purchases and cash disbursement activities. So first we have the purchase requisition, which is number 1. Then we have the actual purchasing itself or the purchase processing itself. Next we have the receiving and inspection of the goods we purchased. And then we have the accounts payable, and lastly the cash disbursement, and then it is a cycle. So what are the goals of the expenditure cycle? So it has a goal of providing needed resources to organization and can be broken down into several objectives, which is first, purchase from reliable vendors. You need to see to it that your vendors are really legit vendors and they really have offices. For instance, you won't be a victim of shell companies or those other types of fraudulent companies. So you need to make sure that you really are transacting with a reliable vendor. Next is to purchase high quality items, obtain best possible price, purchase only items that are properly authorized, have resources available when they are needed, receive only those items ordered, ensure items are not lost, stolen, or broken, and pay for the items in a timely manner. So those are the goals of our expenditure cycle. So let's start with our purchase processing procedure. So we have here the data flow diagram for the purchase system. Now, purchase procedures include the task involved in identifying inventory, placing the order, receiving the inventory, and recognizing the liability, which you will see later on, or I will explain later on. Now, in general, these procedures apply to both manufacturing and retailing firms. So, a major difference between the two business types lies in the way purchases are authorized. So, in manufacturing firms, purchase raw materials for production, and the purchasing departments or the purchasing decisions are authorized by the production planning and control function, because of course they are the ones who will make use of the raw materials. However, in a retail or a merchandising firm or retail firm, goods are purchased for resale. So meaning it is the inventory control function that provides the purchase authorization for a merchandising firm. So again, if manufacturing, it is the production planning and control. For merchandising, it is the inventory control function that gives the authorization. So let's discuss this data flow diagram one by one, or specifically. Let's start with the here. Alita mag-start. Monitoring of inventory records. So in order for us to know when it is already time to purchase, of course, it is important that we have a monitoring of inventory records, because those monitoring will trigger the requisition of additional goods or raw materials. So, firms deplete their inventories by transferring raw materials into the production process if you are a manufacturing firm, or by selling the purchased goods if you are a merchandising firm. Now, in this case, or in our example, the monitor or the person assigned in monitoring the inventory will start or will create a purchase requisition here. Will create a purchase requisition when the inventories drop to a predetermined reorder point. So, if again the predetermined reorder point is achieved, or you've already reached that reorder point, a purchase requisition is prepared and sent to the prepare purchase order function. So here, si person monitoring the inventory will prepare the purchase requisition, which will be forwarded to the person assigned to prepare the purchase order. So this this transaction initiates the purchase process. So, muna siya ang mag-start, nag-trigger sa inyong purchase process. Although, procedures will vary from firm to firm, wherein typically a separate purchase requisition will be prepared for each inventory item as needed, as the need is recognized. So, this can then result in multiple purchase requisitions for a given vendor. Regardless, whatever, how many purchase requisitions will be made, the point is the purchase requisition is a triggering, or it initiates the purchase process. Now, the purchase process or after the purchase requisition is received by the person preparing the purchase order, of course, that person will then prepare the purchase order, as you can see here, naka-purchase order, which is then sent to the specific supplier or vendor. So the purchase orders are prepared for each vendor, and a copy of the purchase order is of course sent to the vendor so that the vendor will be aware of what your order is. Now, in addition to that, a purchase order or a copy of the PO is also sent to set up the accounts payable function. So you have here purchase order copy number 2 is sent to the one setting up the accounts payable. Here. Another copy is, or a blind copy is sent to the receive goods function. So here, purchase order copy. Now, why is it a blind copy? To make the, what do you call this? To make it more, or to make sure that the people in the receiving goods department, or the people assigned in this area, will really check the inventory or the goods they receive, they provide, or the company or the POs provided into them is blank. So this is to make sure that the person in the receiving department will really count the goods on how much is really written in there. So another thing is a copy of the PO is also filed in the close or open purchase order file. So here. So napod kay copy nga ihatag din ha. Now, to make the purchasing process efficient, the inventory control function will supply much of the routine ordering information that the purchasing department needs directly from the inventor. So this is taken from the valid vendor file. So in here. So meaning si purchase order, ang purchase requisition nga magamit or ma-receive is including na siya sa imuhang name sa vendor, kung asa siya mapalit, the address, and the terms or credit terms. Now, the information, again, as I mentioned, includes the name and address of the primary supplier. This allows the purchasing department to devote its efforts in making scarce, expensive, or unusual inventory records. Now, to obtain the best prices and terms on special items, the purchasing department may need to prepare detailed product specifications and request bids from competing vendors. Now, dealing with routine purchases as efficiently as efficiently is a good control permits is desirable for all organization. Now, after which is nakahatag na kag purchase order sa imong supplier, and then your supplier does the katong sales order process nato no in our previous chapter. Now, what will be received by the company is kanina. What will be received is the bill of lading and the packing slip. Now, most firms encounter a time lag between placing the order and receiving the goods, especially if layo ang imuhang supplier. So, during this time, the copies of the PO resides in temporary files in various departments. Note that no economic event has occurred yet. At this point, the firm has received no inventories and incurred no financial obligation. Hence, there is no basis for making a formal entry into any accounting record. However, firms often make memo entries of pending inventory receipts and associated obligations. Now, when the goods or the goods arriving from the vendor are reconciled with a blind copy of the PO. Again, as I mentioned, the blind copy contains no quantities or price information about the products being received. The purpose of the blind copy is to force the receiving clerk to count and inspect inventories prior to completing the receiving report, as I mentioned a while ago. And at times, receiving docks are very busy and receiving staff are under pressure to unload the delivery trucks and sign the bill of lading so the truck drivers can go on their way. So if receiving clerks are only provided quantity, if receiving clerks are provided with the quantity, the they may be tempted to just saying okay, this is okay already, and so on and so forth. So they will not check if the goods are really in good condition, or if the goods are of correct quantity, kay since it's already written na, for example, nakabutang na silang receive nga PO 10 kabuok, tas ang nakabutang sa bill of lading or sa packing slip rather is 10 pud kabuok. So si what do you call this, si receiving clerk, that it will the receiving clerk will just think nga okay, match ra sila 10 og 10. However, in actual, the products only sent is 9 ra di ay, diba? So with that is si receiving clerk is mas mas ma-force siya na mo count sa imuhang inventory na na-received if blank or blind ang copy sa iyahang PO. Now, upon completion of the physical count and inspection, the receiving clerk then prepares a receiving report stating the quantity and condition of the inventories. Now, one copy of the receiving report accompanies the physical inventories to either raw materials or finished goods for safekeeping. So, ari siya sa katuimhang warehouse na or sa imong stores. And then, the other copy is filed in the open-close PO file to close out the PO. So, ari siya sa katong imuhang receiving report, sa imong open-close nga PO file. So, since na-receive naman siya nimo, so meaning ma-close na to ang katong gikan sa imong open PO. Now, a third copy of the receiving report is sent to the AP department. And sa imong nag-set up sa PO, where it is filed in the AP pending file. Now, a fourth copy of the receiving report is sent to the inventory control for updating the inventory record. So, kani, ang fourth copy nimo is nasa katong mag-update, which yung update, ma-update siya sa imong quantity received ay sa imong inventory subsidiary ledger. Which kani imong inventory subsidiary ledger is again, di ba, magamit gyapon na nimo diri kung mag-monitor ka sa imong inventory record. So, isa ra na sila. So, once na kayo mapalit na bag-o, of course, it is an addition to your inventory, which makitaan po na ni sa nag-monitor niya sa imong inventory records. And then finally, a copy of the receiving report is placed in the receiving report file. Kani, for the own copy sa imong receiving department. So, napo na sila report nga mo na ilang mga na-receive for that certain period of time. Now again, the update inventory records, they are the ones updating the inventory records, and also the ones sending a summary report to the general ledger. So, organizations that use a standard cost system carry their inventories at predetermined standard value. Now, posting to a standard cost inventory ledger requires only information about the quantities received. So, because the receiving report contains quantity information, it serves this purpose. Now, updating an actual cost inventory ledger requires additional financial information, such as a copy of the supplier's invoice when it arrives. Next is anhin na ta sa ato ang pag-set up sa accounts payable. Now, during the course of the transaction, the setup AP function has received and temporary files copies of the PO and receiving report. So, as you can see here, nadawat niya from the prepare purchase order and the received goods. So, na kay PO and the copy of the receiving report. Now, at this point, the firm has not received the supplier's invoice yet, which contains the financial information needed to record the transaction. So, if the firm then receives the invoice from the supplier, kaniha if ever gani wala pa siya ma-receive, so ang kato imong mga PO, kay arisa siya sa imong PO o kato imong mga receiving report is arisa siya sa imong AP pending file. Again, if this is not yet received, if wala pa kay invoice, your PO and your receiving report would be stored in your AP pending file. However, if you've already received your invoice, so kauna sa gyapon to nimo balik imong PO ug imong receiving report, so that you can set up your accounts payable already. So in here, when the invoice arrives, the AP clerk reconciles the financial information with the receiving report and PO in the pending file, as I mentioned. Now, this is called a three-way match. Three-way because invoice, PO, o receiving report, which verifies what was ordered was received and is fairly priced. Now, once the reconciliation is complete, the transaction is recorded in the purchases journal and posted in the supplier's account in the subsidiary ledger. So, ari sa imong subsidiary ledger. Kana siya. Now, if recall that the inventory valuation method will determine how inventory control will have recorded the receipt of inventory. So, if the firm is using the actual cost method, the AP clerk would send a copy of the supplier's invoice to inventory control. That is if actual, but if standard is no need na. Now, after recording the liability, the AP clerk transfers all source documents, meaning the PO, receiving report, and the invoice to the open AP file. So, Now, typically, this file is organized by payment due date and scanned daily to ensure that debts are paid on the last possible day without missing the due dates and losing discounts. So, mo na siya sa imong EP file. Now, finally, the clerk summarizes the entries in the purchase journal for the period and prepares a journal voucher for the general ledger. So, kani siya, which will then be posted sa imong general ledger, which ang mag-post sa imong general ledger is of course mag-update sa imong approve sila ang mo-approve sa imong mga vouchers, and then mo-update sa imong journal voucher file, and also will post to your general ledger. Now, as you can see here, ang ato ang AP subsidiary ledger, kaya another term niya is voucher register. Then, ang AP file is your voucher payable. Now, unsa ning mga vouchers? Another system used in setting up your AP is using the vouchers payable system. So again, rather than using the AP procedures, firms use the vouchers payable system wherein the AP department uses cash disbursement vouchers and maintains a voucher register. So instead of a subsidiary ledger, what is maintained is a voucher register. Now, each voucher is again recorded in the voucher register, and it reflects the accounts payable liability of the firm. Now, the sum of unpaid vouchers in the register is your firm's total accounts payable balance. The AP clerk then files the cash disbursement voucher along with supporting source documents in the voucher payable na file. So, this file is equivalent to your AP or to your open AP file, and then it illustrates the liability, or it shows the liability that are still outstanding in a company. So kato mga voucher payable na wala pa mabayaran is of course na sa imong siya sa imo, or considered or active or open gapon siya sa imong vouchers payable. So that is the vouchers payable na system. So, ni siya gani. So this is the manual purchase system, which is basically the same legit sa katong ganihan natin sa atong data flow diagram. However, diri is makita na lang gid nimo ang mga documents. So kana, as to the process is parehas lagi siya general flow. So diri is mas makita lang gid nimo kung asa padulong ang each na mga document. Now, let's move on to our cash disbursement system. So, the cash disbursement system processes the payment of obligations created in the purchase system. Now, the principal objective of the system is to ensure that only valid creditors receive payment and that amounts paid are timely and correct. If the system makes payments early, the firm forgoes interest income that could have earned on the funds. If obligations are paid late, the firm will lose purchase discounts or may damage its credit standing. That is why it is important that you know when is the right time to pay, or you should have a proper cash disbursement system so that you can really maximize the flow of your cash. So it shouldn't be too early. If it is too early, is dili na nimo mapatuyok ang kwarta. So instead na mapatuyok pata nimo ang kwarta, is ang mahitabo you paid too early, so wala na kay mapatuyok na kwarta. If it's too late, if you pay too late or beyond the deadline, tendency is you will pay more, diba? Or it is beyond, or you will not get a discount already. So that is why it is important that you need to know when to pay, and you should pay on time. So the cash disbursement system starts with the open AP file, diba? Mo niya sa in the purchase process, diba? Tanian to sa ato ang open AP file or katong voucher payable which contains the outstanding payables that are still to be made by the company. So, what is important here is that, again, as I mentioned, you need to identify when liabilities are due. So, mo na ang una nimong buhaton. Based on the open AP file, you can see the data on the due dates and the amount due. So, you can identify the liabilities when they are due. So, each day, the AP function reviews the open AP file and sends payment approval in the form of a voucher packet. So, ano yung voucher packet? As you can see here, voucher packet to the cash disbursement department. Padong na siya sa imong cash disbursement, which is then assigned to prepare the cash disbursement. So, the cash disbursement clerk receives the voucher packet and reviews the documents for completeness and clerical accuracy. For each disbursement, the clerk prepares a check and records the check number, amount, voucher number, and other pertinent data in the check register, which is also called the cash disbursement journal. So, kani, kaya niya din i-record ang katong mga details as to your payment. And now, of course, the check is sent to the supplier as payment. Now, a copy of the check is sent to the AP department or the one assigned in updating the accounts payable, because of course, iyan na siyang tangtangon sa imuhang accounts payable. So, what information is sent to the accounts payable will also update your accounts payable subsidiary ledger or the voucher register, which includes the check number and the payment date and other details. And the voucher pocket and the check copy will be stored in your closed voucher file. At the same time, the one updating the accounts payable record will create a accounts payable summary, which will be sent to your general ledger. Also, the cash disbursement will provide a journal voucher, which is also sent to your general ledger, and the posting functions will then be made. So, ato sa imong journal voucher file and your general ledger. So, sa cash disbursement, of course, mo ni siya ang katong mga credits to your, ang journal ani is credits to your cash and debits to your accounts payable. So, mo na siya ang sa cash disbursement system. So, this is what I was talking about. So, here is the manual system. So, kana same na gihapon. Still the same. You start with the open voucher file, and then you search for the ones that are currently due or identify the liabilities due. And then with that is maghimo kag voucher cash disbursement voucher or katong voucher packet, which will then be sent to your cash disbursement department, which will then prepare the check, and so on and so forth. So, still the same. Kanilang is mas nakita na ninyo specifically or shown the documents or the flow of the documents. Now, in the expenditure cycle, we also have computer-based purchases or cash disbursement applications, computer-based accounting systems, which I know you're already familiar with. What is automation and what is reengineering, because this was also discussed in the previous chapter when we talk about the revenue cycle. So, as a recall, automation is when you use technology to improve efficiency and effectiveness. That is automation. While engineering is you use technology to restructure business processes and firm organizations. Now we have different levels of automating and engineering ordering. So remember here, what we are doing is we are automating or re-engineering the purchase and cash disbursement application. So specifically here is the ordering. So we have the computer already generates the PR. So the department that is in need or is making the purchase requisition is will input the purchase requisition in a system, and the system will automatically generate the purchase order. So meaning purchases manually generates PO. So mag-input ra kasi imong PR sa system, then the system generates the PO. So the more connected na imong PR and your PO. Now, another level is when your computer generates the PO itself. So, meaning no PR is needed. With this, PO is not sent until manually reviewed. So, kani is sa PO na automatic ang PO sa imong system. Another level is computer-generated PO is automatically sent without manual review. And lastly is the electronic data interchange, which was discussed in our previous in the previous chapter pod, wherein computer-to-computer communication without PO na. So if ever the company reach the reorder point, automatically that it would send a alert to your supplier that you are already at your reorder point, and thus you need a new supply of inventory. So those are the levels. Now we have here the expenditure cycle databases, the master files. So we can consider the following as our master files. We have the supplier vendor master file, accounts payable master file, merchandise inventory master file. And for our transaction and open files, we have the purchase order file or the open purchase order, supplier's invoice file, open vouchers file, cash disbursement files, and we have also our other files. So if we just refer to your data flow diagram, ma-identify ito nimo kung saan ka itong mga files, diba? So kana. Now we have computer-based purchases. So in here, a data processing department performs routine accounting task. The purchasing, which in this case a computer program, identifies inventory requirements, and then the following methods are used for authorizing and ordering inventories. So in here, the system prepares POs and sends them to purchasers for review, signing, and distributing. The system distributes PO directly to the vendors and internal users, bypassing purchases. And then the system uses electronic data interchange and electronically places the order without POs. So, as you can see, pares sa siya to sa kato imuhang level of automating and re-engineering. So, kanilang na siya. And then, in here, the system already is doing most of the purchase function na or the function of the purchase department. So, meaning, system ma-trigger na ang imuhang system sa imuhang inventory level since it is connected. So, if it is triggered by your inventory level, it sends out the purchase order automatically. It's either to the purchase department, if authorization is still needed, or it can send directly to your vendor or to your internal users like your AP and so on and so forth. So other tasks performed automatically by the computer includes updating the inventory subsidiary file from the receiving report. So once the receiving report is received, dili na necessary nga manually maghatag kag receiving report to the person assigned in updating your inventory file, because once the receiving report is inputted in the system, automatic na pod na ma-update ang imong inventory na file. It also calculates batch totals for general ledger update. It closes the corresponding records in the open PO file to the closed PO file, and it validates the voucher records against valid vendor files. Okay. So in here is the part of the cash disbursement. So tasks performed by the cash disbursement include the system scans for vouchers currently due. So meaning if you're in your open AP file or in your voucher payable file, instead of manually checking if you have a certain due date of payable on that day, the system will alert you na, okay, this specific account amount is due today to this specific supplier, and so on and so forth. So the system automatically knows or automatically alerts you already of how much or when accounts payable will be due. Then aside from that, they can print checks for these vouchers. They record these checks in the check register, so you don't need to manually input it to another check register file because the system does it all for you. And then they batch totals or batch totals are prepared for the general ledger update procedure. So the recording task is made easier through the computer-based cash disbursement. Now, this is an example. This was just what was mentioned a while ago. So you already have here the data processing purchase system. So if you compare it in your DND, DFD, or no, the manual of your purchase system, di ba wala ingan ani ganiha. So in here, these were all done by the other specific departments. Katong mag-update sa imong inventory records, mag-update sa imong mag-manage sa imong inventory levels or mag-monitor sa imong inventory levels, diba? Those were done by a specific department. However, in here, since you already have a system, the system does it all for you. So you already have here the inventory subfile, update, and so on and so forth. So instead of before, diba, there was a person who will monitor the inventory records. Again, in here, the system is the one, or the system is monitoring your inventory, and it will alert you when you've already reached your inventory level. And then there is some cases wherein they are the ones who will directly generate a PR or PO depending on the specifications or what your company wants or how it is programmed. So in this case, since pag abot sa imong reorder point is ang imong ma-generate ra is your PR, which will then be used here sa imong purchase department, which will then prepare the PO and so on and so forth. So again, what is done by your system is more on the recording and the updating of your files. Mao ang nadiri sa imong data processing system. So still, this is just a continuation. So see, the updating and of the procedures, updatings are all done by the system na. Dili na kada individual is maglahi-lahi og update. So si system nang mag-update sa tanang mga nahitabo for that specific day. Now, advantages of real-time data input and processing over batch processing. So it shortens the time lag in record keeping, hence records are more current. It eliminates much of the routine manual procedures such as transcribing information into paper documents because again, we are relying on the system. And then next, it eliminates much of the storage and shuffling of paper documents. Of course, as you have seen in the data flow, the more of the recording or tanang mga mag-updating is di na kailangan magpapil-papil, but rather it's all in the system. It's stored in the system. And it reduces data entry correction procedures. So this is a re-engineered cash disbursement system. So as you can see here, nawala na to ang katong sa imuhang what you call this? Katong naa sa imong inventory purchasing na purchases na department, since the PO is already automatic na generated by the system, and then automatic na pod nga mo sila imong hatag sa imong vendor and so on and so forth. So majority of the transactions are done through the system na. Now let's move on to the internal controls. So we have here the following control points in your expenditure cycle. So we have the transactions, of course, segregation, supervision, accounting records, access, and independent verifications, which we'll discuss in detail. So we have our general controls, which are the organization controls, which include segregation of duties. You have documentation, asset accountability controls, management practices, data center operation controls, authorization controls, and access controls. Now let's start with the authorization controls. Purchases of inventory should be authorized by the Inventory Control Department and not by purchasing agents. Again, Inventory Control Department if you are a merchandising firm. If you are a manufacturing, it is the production planning and control. So in this case, we're for our example, we are let's assume that it is a merchandising. So that is why authorization should be done by the Inventory Control Department. Since again, they are the ones who know that when to order inventories, diba? So sila man ang access to the inventory levels. So of course, only them can authorize the purchase of inventory. Now, next is accounts payable authorizes the payments of bills, not the cash disbursement clerk who writes the checks. So, the accounts payable is the one assigned, or the accounts payable is the one knowledgeable of when accounts are due. So, meaning he should be, or that clerk should be the one who will authorize the payment of bills, not the cash disbursement. Because if the cash disbursement will authorize the payment, the cash disbursement clerk can then write her own check and then i-authorize po niya. So, pwede siya mag-write og check para sa iyang kaugalingon, di ba? Kaya siya ang mag-authorize, siya pa jud ang mag-disburse sa check or mag-write sa check. So, meaning, wala na yung authorization. Now, how do these controls change in a computer-based accounting system? So, in a computer-based accounting system, authorizations are automated. So, meaning all in the system, tanan. Program decision, however, you should make sure that program decision rules must not be debugged. Then, automating inventory in EDI and JIT, so ano siya, wherein, another thing that you should take into account is the faulty inventory, or not take into account, but you should be careful of, is the faulty inventory model can lead to over purchasing or under purchasing. So you need to make sure that your inventory level is really accurate, so that since it is automatic, remember EDI and JIT is automatic, that you have connection with your supplier. Now, if you have a faulty inventory model, there are instances wherein it would send an alert to your supplier that you need inventory for that specific time. However, in reality, you don't. So that is caused by your faulty inventory model. So you need to make sure that your program is really correct and accurate. Next, cash disbursements may automate check printing and signing. So, here, you need to make sure that your programming logic must be flawless. And then the automated signing is only below a certain dollar threshold or certain amount. So, meaning, for instance, the company may set that if the amount payable is 10,000 or less, there is an automated sign on the check. But if it is more than 10,000, you need to print a check with a blank signature, and then you need to ask for the signature from the authorized personnel who will sign the checks. So that is one way of implementing authorization controls in a computer-based system. Now let's move on to segregation of duties. Now for the segregation of duties, of course, the warehouse, the one assigned for the warehouse should be different. Same with the one doing your inventory control, accounts payable, general ledger, requisitioning, purchases, and purchase allowance returns and allowances, and cash disbursements. So again, these individuals or these functions should be separate. So dili pwede na the one taking in charge of the warehouse should also be the one taking in charge or assigned in your inventory control. Same with the one who is assigned in your general ledger and your accounts payable. So these functions should be different. Again, when we are talking about segregation of duties, you just need to go back to the basic principles or concepts wherein you need to separate the custody, the authorization, and the recording. Those three are just are the things that you will just remember. So for instance, in custody, the one in custody are your warehouse. They are in custody of your stocks. Also, the cash disbursements is they are in custody of your checks or cash. So these functions should be separate from the one doing the recording. So who are the ones doing the recording? That is your general ledger and your accounts payable. Now, these functions should be again separate also from the one doing your authorization or authorizing. So who are those? These are your inventory control and your purchase, diba? So again, just go back to those basic three functions. Those, if a function is a custodianship function, therefore it should be separated from your recording function and your authorizing function. So those three lang jud, mao jud na imong magbalik-balik na jud ka anang tuluan, mao jud na imong foundation, or those are just the things, or those three major duties ang dapat yun nimong i-segregate. So this is what I mentioned already. Custody of the asset must be separate from the record keeping. So how do these controls change in a computer base? So extensive consolidation by the computer of tasks traditionally segregated. So meaning the computer programs are already the ones authorizing and processing the purchase orders, and their tendencies is they're also the ones authorizing and issuing checks to vendors. So in here, the segregation function is done by the computer already. What is important now is your access controls. So diha na siya mo vary. As to the segregation of duties or of functions, since it is already done by the computer, and since computer is, of course, since it is a computer, can really mas malasan na ang bias or di na ka siya susceptible to fraud, ingon ana. So there are other tasks that are combined or consolidated in the program, but however, it is just acceptable since it is the computer doing those things, diba? However, what will matter here already is as the access of those computer programs, which we will discuss later on. Next, let's go to supervision. So within the expenditure cycle, supervision is of highest importance in the receiving department, where the inventory arrives and is logged in by a receiving clerk. So in here, there is a need to minimize failures to properly inspect the assets and theft of the assets. So if you can remember sa previous chapter, wherein we talked about the sales returns, diba? So, one of the susceptible or the highest risk or exposure to risk department is the mail room. So, the same thing would go here in our purchasing or expenditure cycle. It is still the receiving department because, again, the receiving department is, this is where there is a not really collusion, but rather this is the area wherein there's an intersection between your custodianship of the asset and the, what you call this, the recording, diba? So the receiving department has the access to your asset, and then since they are also the ones like initiating the recording through the receiving report, so meaning you need to make sure that you have proper supervision in this department to minimize again, the mentioned theft and improper recording. Now, as a computer-based supervision, automation often leads to a collapsing of the traditional segregation of duties. Thus, it requires greater supervision. And then the supervision takes on new aspects of technology advances, which includes electronic monitoring. Another thing, supervision becomes more difficult as the workplace becomes more sophisticated. So meaning employees should have advanced IT trainings, especially those who are supervising, so that they really know what's going on, whether in actual or in system. Now let's move on to accounting records. So a entity must maintain adequate records for the following: accounts payable vouchers, payable checks, general ledgers, and subsidiary ledgers. You already know those things. And the computer-based accounting records rest on the reliability and security of stored digitalized data. Therefore, accountants should be skeptical about the accuracy of hard copy printouts. Now again, backups, wherein the firm needs to ensure that backup of all files are continuously kept. Another thing, most automated systems still had a lot of paper documents. So these paper documents are good for audit trail purposes, but it's often inefficient because again, papers, you have to do manual searching and so on. But paper documents are good for audit trail, and also other paper documents would serve as backups as well. Now, as the system becomes increasing paperless, maintaining an audit trail becomes more difficult because, of course, it's all in the system and it would be hard to trace one by one the transactions in the system, unlike when you are doing it in a manual or using the paper system. So you can really see actual or hard copies of what happened now and what happens next. So let's move on to access controls. So there should be, the accesses include access to inventories, cash, and accounting records. So as you can see here, inventories, cash, and accounting records. How do they change in your computer base? So magnetic records are vulnerable to both authorized and unauthorized exposure and should be protected. Thus, they must have limited file accessibility and programs must be safeguarded and monitored. As I mentioned, if you are an accounts payable clerk, even if you are using a system, you should only have access to the accounts payable module. So ano siya, if you're the inventory clerk, you should only have access to the inventory module. So you cannot have access to the accounts payable or to the general ledger and so on. Same would go to a general ledger. So if you're a general ledger, you cannot be assigned to the general ledger and then have access to the cash disbursement. So again, even in a computer-based, access should still be limited according to your function. And with that, programs must be safeguarded and monitored to make sure that proper access are really done. So dapat na mga specific passwords and so on and so forth. Now, independent verification, lastly, wherein the accounts payable department verifies much of the work done within the expenditure cycle. Since it is in the accounts payable department where there is already a consolidation of source documents from the other departments. No, so you have the PR, it is the accounts payable that receives a copy of the PR, the PO, the receiving reports, and supplier's invoice. So again, the accounts payable clerk does a three-way match between these documents to check and verify the information found in those documents. Another department that does the verification is the general ledger, which verifies the total obligations recorded, or the total obligations recorded equal the total inventories received, and also the total reductions in accounts payable will equal the total disbursement of cash. So the first one is the information the general ledger got from the inventory control, inventory summary, and then the other one is the AP summary report received from the accounts payable department. So, general ledger, as you can see here, is total na kasagaranihang i-deal with obligations with your total inventories and your total reductions with your total disbursements. So, yang i-make sure na for instance, ang nasa imong accounts payable rank or ang total na imong na reduce or decrease in accounts payable is only 10,000. However, ang gipagawas na cash is 10,000. Ang gipagawas na cash is 15,000. So, ano na may sobra nga 5,000. So, ang maka-discover ang sobra is ano na sa imong general ledger. Now, lastly, for a computer-based system, automating the accounting function reduces the need for verification by reducing the chances of fraud and error in the expenditure cycle, since again, the recording is automatic na in the system. So, si system na ang mudu sa matching. However, the need for verification shifts to the computer program, as I mentioned, and the programmers where fraud and error may still be present. So, that is why you need to make sure that the program itself is really stable so that he can identify if there are erroneous transactions or mismatch in the system. So that is the end of chapter 5.